A quiet night often makes people think a little more deeply. Things that once passed through our lives sometimes return to memory in the most unexpected moments. For Aquarius, the journey of loving someone rarely looks like the stories people are used to hearing. Your love often runs deeper than what appears on the surface, like a gentle current moving beneath still water. Someone might walk across that water many times, without ever realizing how precious the current underneath truly is. Time moves forward, and everyone continues along their own path. Then, somewhere along the way, someone pauses for a moment, looks back, and quietly wonders whether they might have missed something more meaningful than they once believed. That feeling doesn't arrive with noise or with long explanations. It often appears in a very ordinary moment, when the heart slowly begins to understand that certain kinds of love enter our lives in ways that are rare. And today's story begins from that very moment of late realization. The moment when someone suddenly understands that the love of an Aquarius is not always something life offers a second time. In life, some kinds of love appear in very different ways. They don't look like the dazzling stories people usually tell each other. They're not the kind that makes the whole world stop and stare. Not the kind of feeling that bursts into existence like a sudden flash of light in the night. Instead, it arrives naturally, almost like a quiet part of everyday life. Someone steps into another person's world, bringing understanding, a sense of calm, and a very unique way of seeing life. Yet they don't try to become the center of attention. They don't make grand promises to prove their feelings. They are simply there. There when the other person needs someone to listen. There when the days feel long and heavy. There when life makes someone begin to question themselves. For many Aquarians, love often carries this kind of presence, a deep connection, yet incredibly subtle. It's like water flowing quietly beneath the ground. People walking above it may not notice it at first. But that hidden stream is what nourishes the entire garden above. Some people stay close to an Aquarius for a long time, yet only begin to understand this years later. Because when something gentle is always present in our lives, we sometimes forget to pause and recognize its value. Familiarity makes things feel ordinary. And when something becomes too familiar, people often assume it will always be there. Then life keeps moving. Paths slowly begin to separate. Different choices appear. And one day, distance begins to form between two people who were once very close. That's when memory starts to speak. Someone might remember the long evenings, the conversations that once felt so simple, the quiet words of encouragement, or the way someone looked at them with genuine respect. Those small fragments of memory, over time, begin to form a clearer picture. And sometimes, in a very ordinary moment, someone suddenly realizes they once stood very close to a kind of love that isn't easy to find. Not the kind of love that makes the heart race wildly for a moment, but the kind of love that allows a person to feel completely like themselves. That may be the moment they begin to understand something they had never considered before. That some of the most precious things in life only reveal their true meaning after they have already drifted away. And from the late realization, a quiet question slowly begins to rise within them. Was there something rare in my life that I simply didn't slow down enough to truly see? At some point in life, almost everyone comes to a crossroads, moments when the heart and the mind stand quietly before several different paths. One path feels exciting, fresh, full of energy. Another path feels calmer, deeper, but its true value isn't always easy to recognize right away. Life has a way of placing people in moments like these, and in that moment, many people choose what feels more thrilling. They choose what creates stronger emotions in the present. They choose what makes the heart beat faster, even if it may not last. Those choices are not necessarily wrong. They are simply steps shaped by the emotions of a particular moment in time. But the love of an Aquarius often carries a different tone. It is not the kind of love that tries to hold someone tightly, not the kind that makes another person feel they must stay out of obligation, and not the kind of love that constantly demands proof. Instead, your love often offers something much wider, a space where someone can truly be themselves, a space where they can think freely, choose freely, and walk forward in the way they believe is right. And because of that, many people when they are with an Aquarius, don't always realize they are experiencing a very rare kind of love, because that freedom doesn't create pressure. And it doesn't force anyone to stay. It simply opens a door and allows the other person to decide for themselves. And sometimes, someone chooses to walk down a different path. Perhaps they believe another road will be more exciting. Perhaps they assume that what they already have will always be there. Life continues to move. Each person enters their own journey, but time has a very quiet way of helping people look back. When new experiences appear, when new relationships slowly reveal sides of life they had never considered before, a natural comparison begins to form in the mind. They start remembering things that once seemed very small. The way someone once listened patiently, the way someone respected their freedom, the way someone looked at them with calmness and sincerity. And as those memories slowly become clearer, a strange feeling begins to rise, not immediate regret, but a slow realization, like soft light slipping into a room after a very long night. That's when people begin to question the path they once chose. Did I truly understand the value of what I had? Or, perhaps, did I walk past something important simply because my heart was moving too quickly at the time? And from those quiet questions, the memory of someone who once meant so much begins to return more clearly than ever before. And then, at some point, life continues moving forward, just as it always does. New days appear, new people enter the picture, new experiences slowly begin to fill spaces that once felt impossible to replace. Yet there is something fascinating about human memory. It rarely returns in a loud way. More often, it arrives in a quiet moment inside a very ordinary day. It might happen while someone is sitting alone in their car after work, or when they pass by a familiar coffee shop, or during a long evening, when the city gradually begins to slow down. And in moments of stillness like that, memory begins opening small pieces of the past, a conversation that once stretched late into the night, a sentence that sounded simple at the time, yet somehow arrived at the exact moment it was needed most. A moment when someone listened patiently to very personal thoughts, without rushing to judge. Those memories are not dramatic. In fact, when they first happened, many people thought they were just ordinary moments of life. But with time, those ordinary moments become bright points in memory. Because people often recognize the value of peace only after they have experienced things that leave the heart feeling more tired. When other relationships appear filled with stronger emotions, more conflict, more confusion, people begin remembering a feeling they once had, a very simple feeling. The feeling of being able to be themselves, without needing to explain too much, without needing to reshape themselves just to be accepted, simply being present and being understood. That is when someone begins to realize that the small things from the past were quietly creating a very special kind of peace in their life. They remember the way Aquarius once looked at them with natural respect. They remember how you gave them space to grow in their own way. They remember the moments when you were simply there, long before they understood how meaningful that presence truly was. At this point, memory is no longer just a story about the past. It becomes something like a small mirror held gently in front of the heart. And through that mirror, people begin looking back at themselves. They begin asking quiet questions. Did I truly understand what I had at the time? Or did I walk past a rare kind of love simply because I wasn't mature enough yet to recognize it? And in the stillness of those thoughts, something slowly becomes clearer. Some people pass through our lives only once. Some forms of love don't need many explanations. Yet they leave a mark that lasts for a very long time. This realization doesn't arrive as loud regret. It feels deeper than that, slower than that. A quiet understanding that certain things once existed in our lives in a very special way. And from that realization, another question gently begins to rise in their mind. Was the peace they once felt when they were with you something they unknowingly walked away from? From those quiet memories, a realization slowly begins to form. It rarely arrives like a crashing wave. Instead, it feels more like the light of early morning, slowly spreading across a room after a long night. There is no warning sign, no dramatic moment like the ones people often describe in stories, just a very ordinary day. Someone walking along a familiar street, or sitting by a window, watching the city shift into evening after the workday ends. And in a very brief second, a thought suddenly appears that somewhere along their journey, they once met someone more meaningful than they had realized. Not because that person tried to appear extraordinary, but because the way that person existed in their life left a very deep imprint. And what surprises them most is this: that person never tried to convince them of it. You never argued to prove your worth. You never tried to hold someone back with long explanations. You simply lived your life in a very natural way. When they were there, you appreciated them. When they left, you continued walking forward, not because your heart didn't know sadness, but because Aquarius often understands that every person has their own path of growth. And sometimes that quiet steadiness is exactly what makes someone think more deeply. Because when someone walks away and still sees you standing strong, still sees you living your life with calmness and freedom, they begin to realize that you never needed to prove who you were. You had always been yourself from the very beginning. That realization doesn't always come with overwhelming emotion. Sometimes it's simply a deep feeling inside, like someone looking back at an old road and understanding that somewhere along the journey they once encountered a truly sincere soul. But time has a very clear nature. It keeps moving forward. Paths that separate rarely return to the exact same place again. Each person continues on with new experiences, new thoughts, and new versions of themselves. And because of that, realizations sometimes arrive after everything has already changed. What remains is not a chance to return to the past, only a quiet understanding that somewhere along their journey they once encountered a very rare kind of love. And that late realization sometimes makes the memory of Aquarius grow deeper over time, because they begin to understand that some people enter our lives not to stay forever, but to help us understand what a truly open and free kind of love feels like. And from that understanding, another thought slowly begins to rise in their mind, that perhaps the most precious thing they once encountered in their life was a heart that loved them with quiet sincerity. After those late realizations, people sometimes begin to understand something very simple, yet very profound. Not every kind of love in life carries the same meaning. Some relationships arrive like a passing breeze. They leave behind a few memories, a few feelings, and slowly drift away with time. Other relationships come as lessons. They help people grow, understand themselves more deeply, and sometimes make the heart stronger. But once in a while, life brings someone truly special into our path. Someone who does not arrive to change us through pressure. Not someone who tries to force us into becoming a different version of ourselves. That person simply appears, carrying a very rare kind of love. A kind of love that allows someone to feel respected even in their differences. A connection that doesn't try to control and doesn't come with strict conditions. When people are with an Aquarius, many of them feel something subtle. They feel they can breathe a little easier. They can think in their own way. They can make mistakes, learn, change, and still be seen with genuine respect. Because the love of an Aquarius often begins with understanding. You don't try to define someone through familiar labels. You see them as a journey still unfolding, a life still growing. And when you love in that way, you offer something very rare. You offer freedom, not the cold freedom of distance, but the freedom to simply be oneself. In a world where many relationships are still trying to reshape each other, define each other, or force each other to fit, that kind of love can become rarer than people realize. Perhaps that is why when someone walks away from an Aquarius, they don't immediately understand what they once had. All only after walking a little farther in life, after meeting new people, after experiencing different kinds of love, do they slowly begin to see that not every place feels the same. Not every connection offers that same quiet sense of respect. And within that silent comparison, a thought gradually begins to form, that perhaps, somewhere along their journey, they once walked past a very rare opportunity. An opportunity to be loved in a way that was open, sincere, and deeply respectful. But like many precious things in life, such opportunities don't always appear twice. Not because life is trying to punish anyone, but simply because every person, every moment, every encounter has its own time. And once that moment passes, what sometimes remains is a very deep understanding that certain forms of love enter our lives not to prove anything grand. They simply remind us that people are still capable of loving one another with respect, with freedom, and with sincere honesty. And perhaps that is also why the memory of Aquarius tends to stay a little longer in someone's heart. As this story reaches the final part of its journey, perhaps the most important thing to understand is not someone else's regret. Life, after all, is always moving forward. Every person makes their own decisions. Every person walks their own path in order to discover who they truly are. So, this story was never really about what someone eventually realized, or how much they may regret the past. The deeper meaning lies somewhere else. It lies within you. Because when we look back at this entire journey, what becomes most visible is not the moment someone walked away, but the way you chose to love. You loved with respect. You loved with understanding. You loved with an open heart, willing to see another person exactly as they truly were. In a world where many relationships are still trying to reshape one another, control one another, or push each other into becoming someone different, the way Aquarius loves can feel like a very rare kind of wind. You offer people freedom. You offer them space to grow. And you do not love in order to possess. You love in order to connect. Some people may only understand that after a long stretch of time has passed. Some may remember, years later, the quiet sense of peace they once felt when they were with you. But, in the end, that is not the most important part of the story. The most important part is that you stayed true to your heart. You offered kindness without needing immediate recognition. You chose sincerity, even in moments when the world made that choice feel more difficult. And qualities like that never truly disappear. They are not taken away simply because someone failed to recognize their value in time. They remain there, in the way you see the world, in the way you treat people, in the way you continue walking your own path. Perhaps one day someone else will enter your life with a heart that is more ready, a heart that knows how to pause long enough to recognize what stands right in front of them. But even if that moment has not arrived yet, your value has never changed, because the ability to love with depth, with sincerity, and with respect will always be one of the most beautiful qualities a human being can carry through their journey in life. And if you are an Aquarius, perhaps the thing worth being proud of is not whether someone returns. It is that you were once the kind of person capable of loving in a way that is truly rare in this world. A love that doesn't need grand demonstrations. A love that simply needs to be sincere enough that when it passes through someone's life, they remember for a very long time that they once encountered a heart like yours.